Leslie Fiedler's essay, Is There a Majority Literature? Challenges the concept of a singular dominant literary tradition. He argues that the idea of a majority literature is a myth because American literature consists of various minority literatures that periodically gain prominence. The traditional idea of a majority literature has been shaped by political, cultural, and educational forces that enforce exclusion rather than inclusion. Fiedler begins by dissecting the terms majority and minority within the literary landscape. While minority literatures often refer to works by marginalized groups such as black, Chicano, indigenous writers, and women who have faced systemic social, political, and cultural oppression, the idea of majority literature typically denotes works created by the dominant social groups. These dominant works are often institutionalized in educational systems as high literature, presented as universal standards of excellence. However, Fiedler critiques this imposed universality, revealing it as a tool of cultural oppression that marginalizes diverse voices and reinforces hierarchical structures. He highlights the cultural tyranny exercised by librarians, schoolmasters, and critics who perpetuate the division between popular literature and high literature. Popular literature consumed by the masses is often dismissed as inferior, while high literature is elevated and preserved by a cultural elite. This distinction alienates the majority of readers whose preferences lie in accessible narratives that reflect their realities. Fiedler emphasizes that the educational system enforces these hierarchies, conditioning students to value certain texts over others based on arbitrary standards rather than genuine engagement or enjoyment. The historical roots of this literary stratification are traced to the rise of the bourgeoisie during the early days of capitalism. The emerging middle class, despite wielding economic and political power, felt culturally inferior to the aristocracy and sought legitimacy through control over literary culture. This led to the institutionalization of literary standards and the appointment of critics and educators as gatekeepers. The novel, as a form, epitomized this shift. Originally a product of technological advancements in mass production and distribution, it became both a commodity and a cultural artifact. However, the bourgeoisie's desire for cultural authority led to the imposition of rigid standards that divorced literature from its popular roots. Fiedler critiques the critics' role in maintaining literary hierarchies. The division of literature into serious and trivial categories mirrors broader societal efforts to control behavior and enforce moral codes. This is evident in the treatment of genres like sentimental fiction, horror, and pornography, which, despite their popularity, are dismissed as inferior. The moralistic judgments applied to literature often serve to mask deeper anxieties about art's potential to disrupt social norms. Fiedler identifies the fear of irrationality and emotional excess as central to the denigration of popular forms. He argues that the academy's role in preserving elitist literary standards has been reinforced by movements like New Criticism and Structuralism, which prioritize formal analysis and textual complexity. These approaches further alienate popular literature, privileging works that conform to specific aesthetic criteria while dismissing others as lacking intellectual merit. Fiedler criticizes this academic elitism for creating an artificial divide between high and low art, which ultimately limits the scope of literary appreciation. Fiedler also explores the paradox within Marxist criticism, which, despite its egalitarian ethos, often upholds elitist distinctions in art. He notes that Marxist critics, in their quest for ideological purity, frequently dismiss popular forms as distractions from revolutionary consciousness. This reinforces the same hierarchies they claim to oppose, perpetuating a distrust of the masses' cultural preferences. The core of Fiedler's argument lies in the recognition of the emotional and irrational dimensions of literature. He contends that the most powerful works, whether deemed high or low, are those that provoke deep visceral responses. Genres like sentimental fiction, horror, and pornography succeed not despite their emotional excess but because of it. These forms tap into primal fears, desires, and fantasies, offering readers a form of catharsis that transcends traditional critique. Fiedler calls for a re evaluation of literary criticism, advocating for an approach centered on ecstatics rather than the traditional ethics or aesthetics. This framework prioritizes the emotional impact of literature, recognizing its capacity to evoke profound responses, irrespective of formal or moral considerations. By embracing this perspective, critics can move beyond hierarchical classifications and appreciate the diverse ways literature resonates with readers. The essay concludes with a call to dismantle the barriers that separate high and low art. Fiedler envisions a literary culture that values emotional engagement and popular appeal alongside intellectual rigor. He challenges educators and critics to reconsider their roles, urging them to foster inclusivity and celebrate the multiplicity of voices that constitute American literature.